Welcome. I'm Andy Carlson, and you're listening to the Time with Tim podcast. Each episode, we explore the impact of complex trauma through the personal journeys of our guests. Along the way, we'll connect with experts and individuals who share their unique perspectives, insights, and practical tools to help you on your healing journey. Let's take this time to learn together. Welcome to this episode of Time with Tim. Today we're diving into one of the most difficult yet transformative aspects of life, relationships, especially painful ones, and the process of setting boundaries and finding closure. We've collected some incredible questions from our YouTube viewers and Lyft staff about navigating these complex dynamics. Together with Tim, we'll explore practical tools, heartfelt insights, and strategies to empower you to take the next step, whatever that may look like. So this first set of questions, I kind of see them in this area of maybe like recognizing and understanding problems within relationships. And so the first one comes from a YouTube viewer, and it's, how can I help a friend or family member who is currently struggling as a victim of narcissism?
So I think the first thing I would say is that people ask a question that often think just is going to get a very simple answer. And the reality within the relationships that come out of complex trauma is there's a whole bunch of different factors that need to be looked at that all play into this issue. And so one of the first things that I think is important for people to realize is that part of complex trauma for many children is that they're conditioned by their parents to be codependent. So mom and dad treat them as they don't see them. You got to earn your love. You don't get validation unless you do what I want. If you don't do what I want, I'm going to abandon you. And so there's all kinds of conditioning that happens that feeds shame, that feeds a fear of abandonment. That becomes your normal. And you think that's a normal relationship, that's a healthy relationship, you think all relationships are like that. And so you naturally then gravitate towards a relationship like that in adult life, which then becomes you're in a relationship with a narcissist. And so if somebody points out to you something's wrong with that relationship, you can't see it because the only template you've ever had to look at relationships is what you're living out right now. And this is normal. This is what you think all relationships are. And so that's part one, is that you have difficulty being able to objectively see your own relationship because you can only see it through your template. But secondly, what happens in the conditioning of a child to become codependent is the parent basically, their needs matter more than the child's. If something is wrong in the relationship, it's the child's fault. And so the child is always made to feel and believe that if I just changed, if I just tried harder, if I just did something more, then the relationship would be happy and healthy. So it's always on the child. They can never see that it's the parent's problem. It's always their problem. So that's how they've been conditioned. Third piece is if they ever tried to say, hey, it's your fault, mom and dad, that's happening, they would immediately get that twisted and distorted and used against them. They would get parents say, hey, you're supposed to respect your parents, honor your parents, you're supposed to not talk back, you're doing, and they get all kinds of punishment, shaming. That would happen if you ever tried to look honestly at the person you're in the relationship with. So basically you then have to, in order to survive, you have to learn to fawn, you have to learn to deny a whole bunch of things, you have to learn to twist and rationalize a whole bunch of things. It's not that bad, probably I could have done better, probably was my fault. And so you just get this very gradual conditioning that prevents you from looking at a relationship. And so what then happens when somebody else comes along, a friend, and sees the relationship, goes, whoa, that is not healthy, and they try to tell you that, you just get defensive. You just don't even want to go there because to you, it's not just the relationship you would have to look at honestly. To you, it then would be all of life, your childhood, how you see yourself, your beliefs about life, your beliefs about how relationships work. And so to open that can of worms would be way too much. So it's easier to stay in denial. Nothing wrong here. Look elsewhere. It's just my fault. I just need to change. And so the bottom line is to try to help somebody that's in that conditioned state of codependency with the denial on top of that and all the beliefs that it's my fault and I just need to change. Very, very difficult to get them to change that perspective, to point it out to them. Probably you're going to get a very defensive response. But having said all of that, what I would say to people is you don't want to try to beat this horse to death by continuing to nag at them, this relationship's terrible. But sometimes just by you pointing out, hey, well, you can think it's okay, but I'm telling you it's not okay. That sometimes can plant a seed that somebody is allowing me to be honest. Somebody's allowing me to look at my relationship more honestly. You might not see that seed germinate immediately, but it could months down the road cause that person to go, okay, maybe I need to start looking at this more honestly. So again, I think the big picture is there's no slick answer to give people like that to say, if you just do this, this, and this, then your friend's going to see the truth. Doubt it. Not going to happen like that. That's just not the way the dynamics of complex trauma and codependency and narcissism work, but you can plant a seed.
I think, coming from this position of friend, that feels like a really difficult position for them to be in, to watch somebody that they care about suffering abuse or suffering in their own life pattern. Like, what are other suggestions that you'd offer to the friend of the person who?
Yeah. So two things that I think I would say to that is, the first thing, if the friend could say to their friend is, hey, I don't want to be here just kind of being a negative Nelly with you about this relationship, but I would really encourage you to listen to some stuff on YouTube, listen to some people that really understand this stuff, and be open to at least kind of explore kind of what we're understanding about relationships today and compare that to kind of your own thinking. So again, it's not just planting a seed, but it's planting a second seed, which is, I would encourage you to do some digging into this on your own, and there's lots of resources available. The second thing, though, that I would say is why many friends struggle with this is because if I go in and point out to my friend that their relationship is unhealthy, it could jeopardize our friendship. It could create tension. It could cause our friendship to basically become, well, you choose my narcissist partner, or if you don't, then we're done. Like it could be the end of it. And so that's what causes a lot of people to just stick their head in the sand and go, okay, it's your problem. I'm not going to say anything. Meanwhile, they're being abused. Meanwhile, there's lots of, like, not just physical abuse, but verbal and emotional abuse happening. But they don't want to lose that friendship. And so it's just realizing that sometimes love has to say, hey, I support you. I'm here for you, but I can't kind of be involved as closely with you when you're continuing to do this kind of stuff, and set a little bit of a boundary that protects you a little bit from being drawn into the chaos and the drama. And because what will happen often for many people is, that this relationship with a narcissist is going to start breaking down and causing more and more problems, more and more conflict. And so what's going to happen is your friend is going to come to you every time there's a crisis in the relationship. And I go, oh, look what he did to me today, blah, blah, blah. And after a while, you're going to go, okay, you want me to support you in the crisis, but you're not willing to change anything. And so crises are just going to keep on happening and get more frequent and even get worse, but you're not listening to any advice I'm giving you, but you want me to listen to everything you're saying and be a shoulder to cry on and support, but that's wearing me out. That's not how a friendship works. A friendship is like, I'll listen, but you better listen too. And so that's where, for many people, you set a boundary partly to protect yourself. To say, hey, if you're going to be in that relationship, and I don't think it's a healthy relationship, and I've told you that, I don't want you to be coming to me every time there's a crisis in that relationship, unless you're willing to change. Because I'm not going to get drawn into that part of your life. It's just too difficult for me.
I'm gonna continue with this. What, a lot of times we feel barriers to setting that sort of boundary.
Oh,
What are some of those barriers in setting that boundary so we can take care of ourselves, and maybe some actions that we could take to be able to be strong enough and resilient enough to set that boundary?
yeah. And I think I would say the biggest barrier probably is the boundary is fuzzy. It's not clear, black and white. We're not quite sure what it looks like on any given day. And secondly, it's, do I need to verbally say this boundary, or do I just live this boundary? Do I just pull away a little bit? Do I just not ask about that part of their life, not talk about it, so they kind of get the hint without me kind of having to confront them with this, here's going to be a new boundary because you're doing all of this, and kind of make it into a big confrontational negative thing. So I think there's a lot of, I want to set a boundary, but is there a way to do it without, it's going to cause some damage, but I don't want to cause an unnecessary damage. And what exactly does that look like? Does that mean they can't text me at all? Does that mean we only talk once a day instead of twice a day? Like, how do you define that boundary so it's not just this fuzzy little thing that's basically no boundary? And that's really confusing. And that's where I say to people that what I would encourage is just to do a non-spoken action boundary by pulling away a little bit, by not talking about that or not asking about that part of their life. See how that goes. And that might be just all of a sudden you're not quite as available to talk as much. You talk a little less frequent. See how that goes. So you're feeling your way along. And so I think another way to say it is, a lot of people want to have this all nailed down, neat and tidy in advance, so they know exactly what to do. This is the kind of thing you got to kind of feel your way gradually by trial and error. And a lot of people don't like that because there's some unknowns there. There's what ifs there. And we'll figure it out as we go. But you got to start by taking the first baby step, basically, and then kind of go from
there. Yeah. You said a lot in there, but I think there's one tiny piece that I think is important. And there's like setting that boundary. There's a little bit of, there'll be pain and damage, or it feels like pain and damage. And so there's this choice of kind of this immediate pain and damage, but also keeping that broader perspective of if the boundary's not set.
Exactly. So what I like to do with clients with this is, if they're parents, to go, if your child is hurting their brother, for they're doing something that's hurting themselves or others, you have to set a boundary as a parent. But by setting that boundary, that child's going to be mad at you. That child's going to be hurt by that and to go confused by that. Like, don't you love me? Why are you being so mean to me? That's how they're going to perceive it. And so certain boundaries come from a heart of love from you, but they're perceived as cruelty from others.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of, I think, what this is about is I know that I'm setting this boundary. It's a good boundary. It's healthy, and I'm doing it out of heart of love, but I know they're going to perceive it wrongly. And so that's where, for many people, it's like, this is going to set the relationship back a little bit. It might not recover from it at all. This could mess up the friendship. So, okay, let's not set the boundary. But then you get drawn further and further into their unhealthy stuff, and it hurts you. And so it's realizing that in a healthy relationship, we set boundaries that the other person might perceive wrongly at first. But if they're really wanting to grow, they're going to ask questions. They're going to sort it out, and they're going to realize, okay, this is actually from a place of love. And they're going to resolve it, and the relationship's going to get stronger because of it. And so it's just realizing that boundaries are always iffy things that could go either direction. And I can't let that potential that it could go in a wrong direction prevent me from setting a boundary. That's going to keep me unhealthy. I have to be willing to take the risk. And if the relationship is strong and healthy enough, they'll work through that and become even stronger.
I have one more follow-up from something that you said earlier. And so what I like here is you've said not to put your head in the sand. And you've invited a setting of boundaries, and also, stating what you see and feel. It's not hiding from what you see to be the truth. And then also there's this level of offering support, but to stay away from nagging. And so how can I find that, where do I know whether I'm being supportive or moving into that nagging area?
Yeah, so I think what you're going to see in this whole podcast is the relationship stuff is so multifaceted. It's so complex that there's so many little factors that all play a part that it's not just this neat little thing. So let me say this. So both Kim and I have people in our life that we've been fairly close to, but stuff has come up, and we've talked to them about it, and they're not going to budge. They get mad at us about it. And so it's basically two things are going on. Is there's now a boundary that we're not going to be able to talk about that topic with these people, but yet we don't want to just kick them to the curb and say, you're out of my life, because we still value the relationship. And so that's the second thing. So the relationship goes from what we thought was a close friendship to a more casual friendship. Because now we can't talk about this stuff that close friends could talk about. We can only talk about certain topics. But yet we still appreciate the casual part of the friendship, that what we can talk about. But now we have to really realize this is not the close friendship we thought. This really, because we can't talk about these things, is a casual friendship. And I got to be honest about that. So often there's a piece of grieving with that. Often it's, I got to treat this like a casual friendship in my mind. And that is, okay, casual friends don't run and share every little detail of their life every time, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just realizing that the relationship I thought we had is not the relationship we actually have. So I have to do some internal adjustments to go, what is the relationship actually? And what does that then mean for what I share, for how much time I spend with them, all of that stuff. And that can hurt because I thought we were best buddies, and we're not. But yet I don't want to dump you. And so again, there's going to be probably some people that you go, I have no problem moving you from what I thought was a close friend to an acquaintance and hardly see you. Whereas others, no, I want you to go to a casual friend. And so there's no clear black and white boundary there. You're figuring it out as to how much support do I get from this person how meaningful is this relationship to me? Can I continue to have a relationship and just avoid certain topics? Or if they're going to keep bringing them up and they're going to nag at me, then maybe I got to set a farther boundary, like just factor after factor that I'm weighing out as I'm going along and figuring this out. And that's what makes this so messy for people. And it makes it so they don't even want to go into those waters. And they just they've been trained as a child, go along to get along. Don't rock the boat. Sweep stuff under the carpet just so there's no conflict. So they're still in that conflict avoidance mode, thinking that's what makes relationships happy and healthy. And it's realizing, no, that's what I had to do as a childhood. That's called fawning. But that was not a healthy relationship. That was a very keep the peace, whatever the cost, but that's not true peace. That's just a truce. If I want a healthy relationship, I got to stand up for stuff. But then when I realize they're not responding, they're not changing, then I go, okay, I don't want to become a nag. I'm going to have to set a boundary. I'm going to have to realize this isn't as close a friendship as I thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you mentioned the word messy, but I can see within what you're saying some layers of structure of like the different levels of boundaries, types of boundaries, the different levels of friendship. But then also, and I personally hadn't thought of this, but it's also that grieving process of if you have to step back from this relationship yourself. And so I think that's really powerful to understand.
Yeah, and I would say there's another, to me, underlying factor for many people that comes out of complex trauma. So complex trauma typically is about you weren't able to connect securely to your parents. So there's an insecure attachment, which means you feel very much alone, but you also feel it's your fault. You're not good enough. And so the fear now, when you finally get a friendship, when you think, oh, this is a good friendship, and then you begin to realize, ooh, it's not as good as I thought. Am I going to be alone again? I need a friend. I want a friend. I don't want to be alone. So maybe I just need to make a few more sacrifices so I can hang on to the friendship. And that's where a lot of people go. But again, what begins to happen is it's a complex trauma scenario is I give up more and more of my needs. I become smaller and smaller to try to hang on to the friendship. And they're not changing. So I'm getting more unhealthy in order to try to hang on to a friendship. Well, it's never a good thing to make yourself sicker in order to hang on to something. But that's what complex trauma trains people to do as the solution when a relationship's not working. But then there's another piece, Andy, that I think is a big factor, and that is in their past, confronting a problem has never brought a good result. So confrontation or conflict always goes bad, always results in more pain. It doesn't result in resolution. It results in somebody getting angry at you, somebody lashing out at you. So avoid confrontation at all cost is really a deep belief for many people with complex trauma. And it's partly because they've never experienced healthy confrontation, where two people who want to get healthy and grow benefit from that sparring and looking at themselves from different perspectives, and they own their stuff and they grow, and it's a good thing. So what I say to people is this: you got to try confrontation at some point. If that person's somewhat healthy, that confrontation might start off a little bit rough, but it's going to get resolved and you're both going to benefit from it. If you do confrontation and they don't own their stuff, they just turn it on you, distort it, make it all your fault, that relationship is doomed. It's not going to work no matter how hard you try. You just now have evidence of that, because it takes two people willing to change to make a relationship work. And they're not willing to own their stuff. So you're getting evidence that this cannot be a healthy relationship. So that sometimes can help people say, okay, then I feel there's reason to set a boundary. There's evidence that points to the need of a boundary.
Um, I want to this next question is similar to the last one, but moving it, I think, just one step further. And so it's how does a how can I help a friend or family member who is stuck and won't leave? And so I'm assuming in this place that maybe they know they're being abused or they know they're with somebody with narcissistic patterns, but they're unable to find that within themselves. So how can we be supportive in that situation?
Yeah, it's super tough. And again, multiple factors, and I've encountered this many, many times. So I remember the very first time, it was a young woman in her late 20s who was in a relationship, very codependent, but he became abusive physically. But she wouldn't leave. And I go, he's beating you up. Like, what's going on here? And it's just what I began to realize was what to me was a very simple, clear, obvious step. To her, she could academically see it, but she couldn't find the strength to do it. It's like she didn't have the backbone. She had the distortions in her head. She was still putting a ton of weight in what he was saying, and he was twisting everything to make it her fault, to make others the problem. And so she was hearing differing opinions and still giving a lot of weight to him. She had so much of her own shame that she didn't think she was deserving of anything better. She didn't want to be alone. She didn't think anybody else would want her. So a little bit of love is better than none at all. All of those different dynamics were playing out because of her own shame. And she had been gaslit for years by parents, by other people, that this is all just part of the gaslighting all over again, that made everything her fault, that she's the crazy one. And she still had a limbic brain that felt in love. He was so loving. He was so wonderful, all of that. So what I began to realize was this is ultimately kind of a deep core shame that is massive, that has created zero backbone to stand up for themselves, to say, I deserve better. I won't take this. They felt wrong in standing up for themselves. They felt they were being selfish. So they didn't respect themselves. So they were allowing everybody else to not respect them either. So it was really, if they didn't learn to respect themselves, and that means healing shame, they were never going to walk away from this. So I made my focus, what are little steps that they could do to heal shame and to stand up for themselves in little ways?
Mm-hmm.
So was there a tiny little boundary that they could set and just say, I would really like to do this, like express a need, express a desire that wasn't too massive, but the other person would say, yeah, go ahead, do that. And they go, oh, I can stand up for myself. Oh, and they would do it, and something would start shifting internally, that I'm worth it, that this is right. It feels right. I feel better about myself. And gradually some shame would heal, and it would give them a backbone to stand up for even bigger things. So it's just realizing this is a slow process. When a person's been that beaten down where they don't stand up for themselves at all and don't respect themselves at all, to get to the point where they start to, you can't get them to take it in one big step. It's got to be a bunch of tiny little wee steps before they finally have the strength to make the bigger step.
Yeah, I like that. It's like these baby steps to begin, and also, like, you're saying that noticing a little bit of that shift in can either working with the shame or just being able to set boundaries and maybe find some of that agency within yourself. This next question is, how does a person respond to a narcissistic family member when they say, I'm sorry? And how do you know that it's sincere?
Part of what's always been interesting to me is what happens in many complex trauma families where there's narcissism is words are actually used to deceive people.
Mm.
So you say the right words, but you don't act on them. You don't mean it. And so words become actually quite meaningless. So I say I love you, but I don't do anything to show love. I say I'm sorry, but I'm not really sorry. I'm not changing at all. But yet, part of the indoctrination children get is, well, I said I'm sorry, so you should forgive me. So they're taught the basis of forgiveness is the person just has to say they're sorry.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need any change of action. Now, the ball's in your court. You're obligated now to forgive them and to let them off the hook. And I go, no, that you've been misled. You've been indoctrinated with a false belief system that lets a narcissist continue to do whatever they want and just use words to get you to continue to let them off the hook. And parents will often do that as well, narcissistic parents, where they say, you're supposed to honor your parents. You're supposed to respect your parents, as if that means I can do anything and you can't hold me accountable. You just have to treat me kindly all the time, even though I'm treating you like dirt. So it's just that twisting. And so what I tell people all the time is, I don't have any problem just letting words be actually meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
Prove it. If you're sorry, let me see it. And what would that mean? You're going to change. And if I don't see you change, then you're not sorry. It doesn't matter what you say. It's your actions that speak louder than words. And that's what I'm going to go by. But people still easily get drawn into people's words. I have to act on what they say. And it's get past that to see their actions and their motives.
That's something that resonates with my story as well, is the words are 100%, ignore the actions, and then it's just a really confusing situation because you're listening to these words that are false or misleading or lies. Yeah.
Another aspect of words, just to kind of fill this out for people, is, so if you were to confront a narcissist, let's say that they lied or that they're selfish, that's always their needs that come first, whatever, they would often initially be in denial. No, I'm not that way. But eventually they might get to the point where they go, sure, I'm that way. So in their mind, they're not in denial. They're owning it. But it's basically, sure, I'm that way, shoot me. I'm not going to change. You deal with it. Well, they're still in denial. They're still not owning it, though they're owning it academically. They're not owning it behaviorally. And so it's really realizing that narcissists play games around denial where they act like they're not in denial. They act like they're owning it, but it's just words. It's just an academic exercise. Nothing's changed in their life.
I'm sitting in that one a little bit because it's that academic owning, but still the actions aren't following, and so just really looking at where the healthy or the true actions are to find your meaning in the truth. The next question, it is, what makes emotional abuse different from physical abuse, and why is it often harder to recognize?
So emotional abuse doesn't leave a physical scar or physical pain. It's the invisible wound that's in your psyche and your soul. And it's usually always around love. It's withholding of love in some capacity that makes you feel that you're bad, that makes you feel punished, that you're to blame, that you're the guilty party. So for example, let's say your mom did something and you were really hurt by it. And now your mom is saying you're a bad kid. You're supposed to forgive me, and your mom's not owned anything. And so you're still struggling with all of this. And so what does mom do? She stops talking to you. If you're not going to kind of come around on my terms, then I'm going to withhold love. I'm going to sit over here and pout. You're going to come to me and say, I'm sorry, Mom, and I'm just going to turn my face away, give you the cold shoulder. I'm going to punish you by withholding love. I'm going to punish you and make you feel even worse for not doing what I wanted you to do. So it's not about what's healthy. It's not about what's best for you. Everything revolves around me. And if you don't comply with what I want, you're going to pay for it. I won't look at whether I'm healthy or not. I'm going to make it all your fault. You're the problem. You're the one that has to change. But I'm going to go beyond that. I'm going to hurt you in the process. And I'm not going to hurt you physically. I'm going to hurt you by withholding love. And what is the child's, so that to me, every child coming into the world has two deep longings: safety, love, and connection. And so the parent's not violating the safety as far as physical safety, but they're playing on the love connection thing. And that's an actually more painful thing than the physical. Because it's playing on your deepest need and longing is to connect and be loved.
You can see too how that'll start to a lot of people in complex trauma, like we're disconnected from our intuition and our gut. And a lot of times things are really confusing. And I can see how all of that plays into us mistrusting our own intuition and gut.
Exactly. And again, children naturally give their parents tremendous weight in interpreting the world. So what mom and dad say must be right. So if mom and dad distort reality but say it's the truth, then I'm going to believe it, even though it could be totally wrong. So if mom and dad say it's my fault, it must be my fault. If mom and dad say I'm a selfish little kid, then it must be true. I'm a selfish little kid. So then I just get all these deeper shame messages and beliefs that it's all my fault. I'm the terrible person. So I actually get gaslit in the process. And that to me does just a ton more damage beyond just the emotional abuse. It's the after effects, the ramifications that shape a child's internal world very negatively.
These are actually a little bit similar, but I'm gonna shift directions here. We had a lot of questions that kind of related to other barriers to leaving, like more specific barriers to leaving a relationship. And so the first one in this group is, what if I can't leave a bad relationship or household due to financial constraints?
And I've run into that so many times. And to me, it's that practical consideration that you can't avoid. It's just life. You still got to have a place to live, put food on the table. And if you got little children, it's an even bigger issue for you. And so I tend to approach it. There's three pieces that I want people to think about. So sometimes when you're in a narcissistic, even abusive relationship, and you realize you can't get out this moment, you basically have to learn to fawn to survive and to keep your kids safe. What I want people to do is to say, is there little things you can do even within that relationship to find safety for yourself? Times of safety, times of being able to connect with other supports who can help you. That'll help you get through that period while you're trying to get a way out. And so you can't get to total safety, but can you get to partial safety? That becomes an important piece. But secondly, don't just kind of resign yourself to, I'm stuck here forever. I'm stuck here temporarily. But use your brain to begin exploring. Is there a shelter maybe that I could go to? Is there a way I could start getting a part-time job, or I could get on welfare? Or what are other options that would enable me to get to a place financially that I could get out of here. So don't just kind of say I'm stuck and don't look. Yes, you're stuck temporarily, but start looking at options. Start exploring what you could do. And usually what I find with people is within a year, they usually have some stuff that starts coming together that enables them to move on and they're in a better financial place. So it's such a difficult thing, but it's a reality for some people. You are temporarily stuck. And if I can expand on it, just another scenario in which that works out is a lot of people who've got very narcissistic, even abusive parents that they've set boundaries with. But let's say their parents now are very sick and all their siblings are in other parts of the country and they're the only one that's close. And they go, I just feel obligated to be there to take care of them, to give support. But then every time I go over, they're narcissistic, they're abusive, they're saying all kinds of hurtful things to me. And so it's all of a sudden the boundaries I would set normally in a relationship, I can't set in this one because there's other factors, and that is they are my parents, they have nobody else. And so what I say to them is, okay, I get it. You have to kind of change your normal approach to boundaries because there's exceptions, there's special conditions here, circumstances. But that doesn't mean you still can't do things to protect yourself. That doesn't mean you can. So again, you can sometimes limit the amount of time you spend with them. You can set some boundaries verbally and just say, if you're going to talk to me that way, I'm leaving. Because I'm not going to put up with that. And they'll learn from you that you respect yourself, so they better respect you if they're going to have a relationship with you, because you're not going to let them disrespect you. Or you're going to say, okay, I can tolerate the odd little annoyed shot that mom's going to make, and I don't have to react to it. I can just go, that's her stuff. Don't take it on. And kind of be prepared for that little bit of what I'm going to tolerate. So there, again, there's different factors, but it's just realizing that sometimes we find ourselves in circumstances that aren't neat and tidy as far as an escape plan with a narcissist. And it just is going to take a bit of a rethink and a slower approach to coming to the solution.
Mm-hmm. I think putting, one of the things that I know has hit me in the past, and I know hits other people, is there's this immediate disappointment when you mention time, but there's also, a bit of a thankfulness when you acknowledge kind of the truth of this, that this may not be tomorrow, it may not be a month, but even a year is temporary, and so being cognizant of a year and this much longer time and being in it.
Yeah. One thing, if I can add, Andy, just what some people don't realize that they do when they're in that kind of circumstance. So they're in a very emotionally abusive or physically abusive situation, is they still minimize it in their mind because they're used to it. That's been part of their life. And so because of that minimizing in their mind, their tendency is to stay in it longer than they should, to not kind of have a desperation to get out. They just tolerate it. What I want them to realize is if you have little children, if you have young children, and you're staying in that relationship, you're not just hurting you, you're hurting them big time. And so you're not just thinking about, can I tolerate this? You're thinking about the damage that this is doing to the kids, because it's creating huge trauma issues for them to be exposed to that kind of anger, emotional abuse stuff, physical abuse. So you have to realize this is maybe more of a crisis than I kid myself into thinking. And so that becomes to me an important thing. So then where some people go, if I can kind of jump to another question that comes out of this, and that is, but isn't it better for them to the kids to have a mom and a dad? And it's like, okay, if you stay in the relationship, the kids are going to get hurt. If you leave the relationship, the kids are going to get hurt. The kids are going to get hurt either way. That's not the issue anymore. You're looking for a solution where the kids aren't going to get hurt. It's not going to happen. The way to look at this is, where are they going to get the least hurt? And when am I going to be able to help them process their hurt? And if I stay in the relationship, they're going to continue to get hurt, and I can't help process it with them because they're not safe. If I get them to safety, yes, they're going to get hurt, but we're going to be able to process and heal together. And that hurt's not going to last. And so it's getting beyond. So the danger when you're in a relationship like that is you just think very much short-term thinking. You got to go to long-term thinking and realize, yes, the kids might go through a lot of pain if you leave, but eventually it's going to lead to a much healthier, better place for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is, I think this is the second time that you've said something similar here. And a lot of times, like, we think that there's a right choice or that there's a good choice. And what I'm hearing from you is, when you're looking at both the short-term and the long-term perspective, it's a choice between a poor choice and a poorer choice.
Exactly.
And so sometimes you have to make this poor choice.
Exactly. And that, again, for part of what comes out of complex trauma is you want very black and white, all or nothing thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not an option here. So it's being able to think in realistic terms about what's going on, not in idealistic terms about what you would like it to be. And that's hard for people, and that's often why you need a coach or a therapist that can help you adjust your thinking to more reality and to think longer term than just that short term.
Here's another question with another barrier. How can I justify divorce if my religion forbids it or looks down on it?
Again, I get asked this question a lot. And so another question, part of that would be, how can I set a boundary with my parents when the Bible says to honor your parents? And so what I do with people is basically, your religion might forbid divorce. Your religion is probably trying to tell you that God forbids divorce, that the Bible forbids divorce. But if you actually look into the Bible, God does not forbid divorce. God actually says to Israel himself, I am divorcing you. And so the Bible does not forbid divorce. It's some person's interpretation that they are now trying to present that this is what God says. So just because a religion forbids it doesn't mean it's right. And that's really what it boils down to. And so to me, that's where a lot of people come to, is they think because the religion teaches that God teaches it, so to get a divorce is to go against God, which to them they could never do. That would be the ultimate in kind of sinning, doing bad stuff. And it's realizing, again, you've been indoctrinated to think that, but that's not actually what the Bible says. That's not actually what God says. That's an interpretation. So there's a deconstruction process that people have to be willing to go through in looking at that. So part of what I sometimes do with people is, so your religion forbids divorce. So what you're basically saying to me is that your religion supports abuse. Well, no, but that's what you're saying. So you're saying that God supports abuse because it forbids divorce. And so it's just helping them realize the flip side of that belief, that when you look at it that way, you go, how can that be from God? So that interpretation can't be correct if it so clearly violates love. So again, it's just trying to help people think through kind of the indoctrination they've been given that they've never been able to challenge without being told, oh, you're going against God. You're supposed to have faith. You're supposed to just obey. Shame on you for challenging God. And it's getting permission to start looking at this from perspectives that expose that this can't be from God, because it goes so clearly against love and healthiness.
I really hope that there's somebody listening, I'm sure there's people listening that really needed to hear that perspective.
Yeah, and to me, it's when people or religions take verses out of the Bible and use them to teach things that actually end up supporting abuse. And so honor your parents, but your parents can be abusive. Your parents can mistreat you. And I'm supposed to continue to just take it and never set a boundary. How can that be the correct interpretation against divorce? So that then when people try to take those interpretations and say that's what God teaches and use it, they now use it as a weapon. They now use it to control people. That's spiritual abuse. That's what creates religious trauma. And so sadly, so many people that do have trauma, for many of them, there's an aspect of spiritual abuse that's part of that, because that was used by the parents to try to shape their conscience to a certain behavior that was actually unloving, but they're told that's what God wants. And it's a lot more prevalent than people realize, that this spiritual abuse aspect often plays a big role in keeping people locked into kind of complex trauma beliefs and perspectives.
I had a really enlightening experience once. A woman I knew shared Christians come in two varieties. There's the God is fear Christian and the God is love Christian. Unfortunately, the God is fear Christians will tell you that they are God is love Christians.
Exactly.
And so sometimes it's hard to tell the difference.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where, to me, every religion in the world, there can be very kind of healthy aspects to it, but there's always going to be forces within it that gravitate towards a fear-based religion. And so let's control people through fear. Let's shape them and their behavior and get them to obey based on fear. That always becomes an unhealthy religion. And so anything that's driven by a fear base, it comes out of that whole shame-based culture, that you don't control people by love and what's right. You control people by what will people think. You're going to get in trouble. And it's a fear-driven thing. Or if you go down that road, something really bad is going to happen to you, or God's going to judge you, or you're going to go to hell. Fear, fear, fear. And it's always the characteristic of shame-based religions that become unhealthy.
Turning direction just a little bit here. The next question is, why do I feel so sad when I reminisce about the good times in a toxic relationship, even when I know that leaving was the right choice?
I think, again, there's several factors, but probably what I would say is the most prevalent factor is I don't think people realize the power of oxytocin in the brain, and it's in the limbic brain. And so the limbic brain is your emotions. The limbic brain is where the good feelings get captured and create powerful memories. Okay, so that's part one. Part two is I don't think people realize fully the power of not connecting as a child and not feeling loved. So there's always I'm not good enough, I'm lonely, nobody loves me, I feel bad about myself, I just long to be loved. And then the first person you meet that seems to do that, the flood of oxytocin is so powerful that even years later, you go, oh, that was such a beautiful thing. Because you still have those initial memories that come out of deep shame meeting what looks like the answer to that, longing to be loved. And it releases this flood of oxytocin. And I've had so many clients who left an abusive relationship, like just they almost got killed. And years later, they still miss the person. They still have these memories of the good times of that person. So there's one other factor here, and that is a narcissist, when they want to get in a relationship, they never come in showing their real colors. They always come in putting their best foot forward to groom you. So they become pros of the hustle. They become pros of using love languages to try to convince you that you're loved. They become pros at finding people who are needy and shame-based and long for loved. And then they groom them. They start to love bomb them. They start to give them all the things that make them feel loved. But their motive isn't love. Their motive is, I want to look good. I want you to adore me so I can control you. Their true colors don't come out till after they feel they conquered you. And so they'll give you tons of good times. They'll buy you gifts. They'll be so pleasant. They'll make you the center of their world. But the goal is that eventually you make them the center of your world. And so it's a game. They're not even aware of it, but it's a process where they're flooding you with what you've been longing for all your life. Huge flood of oxytocin, but it's all fake. Their true colors come out later. But once their true colors come out, your brain goes to, but it used to be this way. They were such a wonderful person. I think we can get back there. If I just tried this, we could get back there. No, you can't. Because what you're basing that on is not the true person. It's a fake person that you thought was the true person. Mm-hmm. You're now seeing the true person. That's what you got to deal with. So you got to get out of your limbic brain and go, but I feel they're so wonderful. We had so many good memories to go, but what's the evidence? Let's get into our cortex and look at the evidence and get our feelings out of this. And so then what I say to people is, those feelings are going to come. It's going to take years for those feelings to kind of get worked out of your limbic brain. The key is not to judge yourself when they come. The key is just don't feed them. Let them starve. Let them, because if you feed them, if you start going, oh yeah, they were so wonderful, you're feeding a monster that's only going to grow. And it's going to start messing you up. So the feelings are going to come. The memories are going to come. You're going to have sadness that goes with that. Just don't feed it. And eventually they get less and less.
Yeah, I see a corollary here. Earlier we talked about looking at actions over words. And so here we have this really strong love, connection, feel-good feeling brought on by oxytocin that doesn't correlate with the later relationship, the later behaviors, the later actions. And so we can be drawn so much to that.
Yeah, so it's key, I think, just to fill out a bigger picture for people is what happens in complex trauma for most children is it happens when you're a child. And so basically your main part of your brain that's running the show is your limbic brain because your cortex hasn't developed yet. And so you see everything happening in your life through an emotional lens. That's your limbic brain. And it leads to emotional reasoning. So I feel that they love me, so they must love me. Meanwhile, they're grooming me to sexually abuse me, but it feels like love, so it must be love. And so that emotional reasoning can be very distorted is the key thing. And so it's realizing that I got to get to my cortex where I look at facts. I look at evidence. I don't base reality on how I'm feeling, because that can be very misleading. And so that you can flip that, because then people can get into a relationship that's actually healthy. And so the person they're in a healthy relationship with sets a boundary and says, I just need to spend a little less time with you today because I got to work on some stuff. That feels like rejection. So emotional reasoning, oh, they're rejecting me. Uh-oh, this is a terrible relationship. I need to get out of it, sabotage it. And so it's realizing that that emotional reasoning can mess up healthy relationships, and it can make you think unhealthy relationships are actually healthy. And so I got to be so careful about emotional reasoning and being in my limbic brain, because it can really mislead me when it comes to relationships.
Are there any specific tools that you would recommend to people for kind of learning to recognize when they're in emotional reasoning, but also to maybe lessen its impact?
Yeah, that's such an important question that everybody's got to sort out gradually. And again, it takes time to figure this stuff out. But what I find for myself is, number one, I need to be aware of when I'm in my limbic brain. And so that's when I'm feeling stronger emotions: anger, rejection, frustration, sadness, even extreme happiness. I'm in my limbic brain. So I'm actually in a vulnerable place at that point in time. I don't know if I'm emotional reasoning, but I might be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the second piece, is often I can't be objective and see myself accurately at those times. So that leads to the third piece. That's where I need safe, mature people, mentors, coaches, where I can go, okay, this happened. Here's what I think is going on. And they go, yeah, I don't think so. I think maybe you're reading into that. I think maybe you're not seeing that correctly. This is how it could be. This is how it could be. This is how it could be. And so part of what happens with emotional reasoning is it tends to get dogmatic, because I'm feeling this. It must be this way. This is the only way it can be. We get tunnel vision. And that's where we need others to say, no, there's other ways that you could look at this. There's other explanations as for what just happened here besides what you think is the only explanation. So I really need healthy sounding boards in my life that I can bounce off my perceptions when I'm potentially in an emotional place. And then the other thing for me is, if I know I'm in an emotional reasoning place, intense emotions, often I will say to myself, don't say or act for a day. Wait until you've cooled down. Wait until you're kind of grounded. Then you'll probably be in a better place to look at this and evaluate it. But right now you're not able to look at it, even though you think you are. So just let some time pass, and then wait and see how you feel tomorrow.
So I hear, I'm gonna cut it a little bit, and I'll just say I hear three things there. One is that really recognizing if you're in your limbic brain. Two is having safe people that you can bounce things off of. And then that third is just this, having a cooling down period to allow yourself to recognize things after the fact. And so, continuing a little bit with emotional reasoning, how can I feel safe enough to process my emotions when fear is the emotion that needs to be processed?
This is, to me, one of the most critical pieces in recovery, but most challenging for some people. So people can't heal from trauma unless they're in a safe place, which means they have safe relationships. But for many people, it's, where do I find safe people? How do I get safe relationships? How do I find safety? And so again, they're not going to drop out of the sky magically tomorrow. This is a slow, gradual process to build a community of safe people. And you got to start with one. So what we know about children is they don't need 20 safe people to connect to be healthy. If they have one safe person that they can create a secure attachment with, they can get through a ton of crap. Just focus on finding kind of one safe person. And it can start with a therapist. It doesn't have to just be some friend. It can just be a good therapist that's going to walk with you in the initial part of the journey until you can build other safe people supports in your life that are friends. But it's really starting with, you got to get that safe person. Okay, having said that, there's a second piece that I think people can do internally. And that is, you can create some internal safety within yourself that you can go to through visualization, or you can create a safe place geographically that you can go to, like someplace in the woods where you go for a walk, or by a lake, or some part in your town, a park where you can just go and that's your quiet spot, your safe spot, where you can do some breathing, meditation, whatever somatic type of exercises to help calm you, to help bring your parasympathetic nervous system online and get you into a better place. So it's really learning that when a person's not safe, they're in their limbic brain, they're in their sympathetic nervous system. So they're in fight, flight, freeze mode or fawn. How do you get them back into their parasympathetic? How to get their vagus nerve so that it feels safe and so it can be kind of socially connected to people again. Lots of little pieces that you can try, from internal visualization to having a safe place geographically, to having one friend, to doing some meditation, to doing some exercises, somatic exercises, that all of those different things help ground me, help get me out of my limbic into my cortex, help get me out of my sympathetic into my parasympathetic. And every person's just got to gradually, piece by piece, figure out what works for them.
We're gonna move here a little bit to another kind of the broader topic area. I call it setting boundaries and managing conflict, which we've talked about a little bit. And so the first question here is, during conflict, what's best in stating a need for a boundary when the other person doesn't care or lashes back in hurt? What's a healthy response?
So I would say two things to me with that, Andy. Number one is, so in the past, let me just use Kim and I. There would be times where Kim would lash back if I said something. And I would know at that point that she's just hurt, but she's open to discuss. So I can go back to her and say, no, that's not the way it is. This is what my motive was. This is where I'm coming from. I don't think you're seeing it accurately. And we could start to work it through. There would be other times where she would lash back and I go, there's no discussion today. That's a closed door today. Don't try to engage because it's only going to make it worse. So just back away, back off. And then with that one, it would be to come back a day later, 2 days later and say, could we talk about what happened the other day? When they're in a calmer place, when I'm in a calmer place. So, or what I've done in extreme cases has been, I just write out everything that's happened, my perspective in great detail, kind of in a letter format, and then just ask them to read it. So there's not the emotional stuff that comes from hearing voices. It's just very clinical on paper, but heartfelt. So I think it begins by just realizing when a person lashes out, are they lashing out from this is a closed topic, no discussion available, or are they just a bit hurt, but there is discussion available? You got to start with that. And then based on that determines whether you just back off or whether you kind of reframe it and try to present it in a way that's not, you're the bad guy, but here's how I see things. Here's where I was coming from, that try to explain your side without being in attack mode. So yeah, that's kind of in broad strokes where I.
What about if the partner, so it sounds that there was a place where you were able to have this connection and communication and uh, kind of receive and hear each other. What about a partner who just may not care or doesn't care?
Yeah, so I think to me that's the bigger picture that has to be looked at. So if I was in a relationship with somebody that every time I pointed out something, they lashed out and there was zero discussion,
Hmm.
at some point it's like, okay, they're not never willing to look at their stuff. They're never going to own their stuff. They're not willing to change. So this relationship can't work.
Mm.
So for me as a counselor, for many people, that's what their deeper fear is that they're getting backed into a corner where they have to face the fact that this person's unwilling to change, unwilling to ever own their stuff, admit it. It's not going to work, but I don't want to leave the relationship. I need the relationship. I got to hang on to the relationship. It's got to be something I can do. I'll just change a bit more, a bit more, a bit more. Surely that'll help. And it's avoiding facing reality that's really happening. But why am I avoiding facing reality? Because of my deeper fear that I'll be alone, that I'll be rejected again, that all of that shame, loneliness, relationship stuff that's really underneath it. And so until a person's willing to say, hey, I don't need this person to be okay. I don't need this person to be loved. I can have other relationships. I can learn to love myself. I can learn to meet my own needs. As long as you feel you can't survive without this person, you're never going to stick to a boundary. You're always going to draw lines in the sand. Say, if you do that again, I'm out of here. But then they do it again and you're not going to enforce it because you don't think you can live without them. And so it's really realizing I got to get to a point where I realize relationships are not based on needs. Relationships are based on love. That I can take care of myself. I'm not having this relationship because I desperately need somebody to take care of me. I'm having this relationship because we're better together. We love each other, but we meet most of our needs all by ourselves. So this relationship is more focus of giving than it is about getting my needs met. And that's a massive internal shift for people.
Could you define it a little bit too, that if it's so one-sided, that there's some recognition that you're not actually in a relationship?
And to me, it's the little child that is constantly thinking, if I just am a better girl, then daddy will love me. And if dad throws me the odd bone, then, oh, dad loves me. See, this is a wonderful thing. And you kind of build all of that up in your mind. But there's so much denial. There's so much desperate longing to be loved and all of that you want to say it's a relationship, but not actually face that this is not a relationship at all.
Yeah, yeah, I think that wounded child can have difficulty kind of facing that reality that it's not a healthy relationship and not a healthy place to stay. The next question is, so how can we make sure we don't let unsafe and unhealthy people overrun when we go no contact? Do we have a responsibility to stand up to them and hold them accountable?
When I first started teaching the boundaries courses as part of our React and Lift programs, what I started saying to the clients was, it's actually quite easy to set a boundary. It's super hard to enforce a boundary. I think, and I said that because I think a lot of people think, without realizing it, that if I just set a boundary, then everybody's going to respect it. and it's going to be quite easy. And it's, oh, okay, that's your boundary. I respect it. The reality of complex trauma and narcissism is you can set a boundary, but nobody's listening to it. So now you have to enforce it. And they're only going to respect your boundary if you enforce it and not allow them to step over it. And they're going to try every trick in the book to get you to go back to the old boundary, to hook you back to kind of where they want it to be. And so it's so what I tell people is, in your own mind, just don't go through the process of you setting the boundary with the person. You need to then go in your thinking to, okay, what am I going to do if they guilt trip me? What am I going to do if they just ignore it? What am I going to do if they love bomb me afterwards to try to get me to go back? I need to be prepared for all the games they're going to play or all the things they're going to do to ignore my boundary. And that might mean I look like a total bitch. That might mean I look like I'm a mean person. But this relationship will never be healthy unless there's healthy boundaries. And so if they're not willing to have healthy boundaries, then I have to try to set boundaries and enforce them. And if it gets to the point where they're still not respecting it and it's still constant warfare, then I need to just walk away from this, because it's going to wear me out and it's going to wear me down. And so again, it's what I find for a lot of people is they're in relationships that aren't going to work. The only solution is to walk away from the relationship, but they go to a therapist or a counselor or a coach looking for some advice to somehow hang on to this relationship and force it to work, because they don't want to walk away. They don't want to set the only kind of correct boundary. And that's, for many people, they're going to do everything possible to avoid walking away. But that is no longer about their partner. That's about their crap. That's what they're avoiding, is dealing with their crap.
Yeah. This came really clear to me once in talking with a friend who had somebody who kept overriding her boundaries. And I see it a little bit as the words versus actions dichotomy again. Our words are a preamble to a boundary. I'm
Yes.
inviting you to respect me. But the reality is that if you keep walking over that, it's the only part of the boundary that's actually the boundary. It is that enforcement part. It is the action that I take to respect myself. Because
Exactly.
ultimately I am the only one who can respect myself if you aren't.
Exactly. And then to me, the flip side of that is often when we set a boundary, people verbally say, oh, okay, I respect that. I'll do what you say.
Mm-hmm.
But then they do subtle action things
Mm-hmm.
that are violating their boundaries. So their words, again, are meaningless in their commitment to our boundary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a real powerful thing to realize, and probably really difficult to enact in person without a lot of practice and healing.
Yeah. So if I can just kind of take what we just said a minute ago there and just frame it this way for people. So what a narcissist would do is try to make everything's your fault. You're crappy. You don't meet my needs. You're selfish. It's always about you. And you just keep putting your needs aside, sacrificing more and more and more, but it's never good enough. And they just keep distorting everything that's your fault. So here's where I'm going with this. So the only solution, they're not going to change. The relationship's never going to be healthy. The only solution is, okay, it's time to leave it. But I'm afraid to do that. So what does the victim then do? It's like, oh, if I could just change my husband's such a narcissist, that my partner's such a selfish person. So now you're doing the exact same thing to make them the bad guy. So you avoid looking at, it's my shame, it's my fear. That's really the issue here. And so if I don't deal with that, I'll never have a healthy relationship with anybody. Um, and so, what I want people who are in narcissistic relationships, who are the victims within that, to realize it's very easy to get preoccupied with the narcissist and how unhealthy they are. But the issue is, unless you deal with your shame, you're just going to go from one narcissist to another, even if you left. Focus on healing yourself and getting yourself healthier.
The next question, is it acceptable to distance myself from family to heal? And if so, how?
Again, one of the questions I get asked a lot. So let me begin by, so shame-based culture and religious culture both would teach that parents have this extra power and therefore you have to be loyal, respect. And so respect, loyalty, obedience is overemphasized. They can be total jerks, they can be abusive, but you can't leave them. You can't set boundaries. And so there's a distortion in shame-based cultures and in religious cultures around family. That family is blood, you never leave blood, you don't set boundaries with blood, you're always there for blood. And they put a kind of a spiritual, religious, moral virtue on that. But what I say to people is, I wouldn't let anybody else who is not my family treat me that way. I'd set boundaries in a heartbeat. Say, you're out of my life. I can't get healthy with you in my life. I can't allow people to just disrespect me and abuse me. So why is it all of a sudden I have to do it with family? That just does not make any sense at all. And so what I want people to realize is, I'm not saying you should hate your family. I'm not saying that you'll never see your family again. What I'm saying is that right now you're realizing, I can't get healthy. I'm not strong enough to withstand the pressure of all of my family's unhealthiness. I need a break from them for a while so I can get stronger and heal. And then maybe in a couple of years, I can come back and spend time with family and it won't bother me. But right now, if I'm spending time with family, it's wearing me down. I just get triggered, and I don't have the tools or the agency to deal with that right now. So I just need a break for now in order to get stronger myself. And then maybe I can go back to a certain level of relationship with my family. So that is, to me, a scenario. What I want people to realize is they're still your biological family. You're always going to have feelings for them, etc. And I'm not trying to say you should get a hate on for them. It's just being honest with yourself about what you need right now to be healthy. But having said that, what is a family? What, by definition, is a family? It's not, there's biological family, yes, but what is family? It is the people I connect with. It is the people I have secure attachment with. And so that's why, to me, for most people from complex trauma, they're the black sheep of their biological family. They haven't connected there. They don't belong there. Go find other black sheep. Create a surrogate family. That's an even stronger, better family than biological. So do you need a family to heal? Yes, but it doesn't have to be a biological family. You can create your own surrogate family.
I think that's really important for people to realize, especially when we have, been told to have that such a deep loyalty for our family, that we can go out and create a new family somewhere else. What are some healthy ways to respond when someone accuses you of being selfish for setting boundaries?
Well, I would say, first of all, just expect that that's what you're going to get accused of. So, again, to me, Andy, there's several pieces with this. A narcissist who's being selfish, and you're codependent with that narcissist, you've sacrificed your needs and given up your needs and your rights for years to try to make the relationship work. And they've been able to get whatever they want and do whatever they want. So your norm has been very out of balance. You have zero needs. Their needs are all that matter. So what's going to happen now is as soon as you try to make it healthy, where your needs matter just as much as them, that actually feels very selfish. And to them, that is being very selfish. So compared to the old template, it seems very selfish. But what people have to realize is don't go to emotional reasoning because this feels selfish. It must be selfish. Go, no, I'm trying to make it where your needs matter just as much as mine. That's the only way to have a healthy relationship. That's what love means, is your needs matter just as much as mine. So this boundary is not me being selfish. This boundary is trying to make my needs matter just as much as everybody else's. Now, having said that, what people then need to kind of factor into their thinking is, in even the healthiest of relationships, where my needs matter just as much as Kim's, that doesn't mean on any given day that it's going to be 50-50. There's going to be some days where I'm going to make some sacrifices and put her needs ahead because of the circumstances. There's going to be other days where she puts her needs aside and makes sacrifices. But overall, it's going to kind of work out to 50-50 because when you get two people living together who have different tastes and desires and passions, there's going to be disagreement during any given week about what do you want to do. Well, here's what I want to do. Well, that's not what I want to do. So one of the things that Kim and I did early in our marriage that was very helpful to us is if I said, what do you want to do tonight? And she says, I want to go shopping. And I go, oh my goodness, that's the last thing in the world I want to do. What do you want to do? Well, I'd like to watch a football game. Well, that's the last thing that she wants to do. So now we got a big conflict. So what I learned to do was I would go, scale of 1 to 10, what's your 10 for tonight? She goes, shopping. I go, okay, what's your 9 for tonight? Okay, what's your 8 for tonight? And I go, okay, I can do your 8. Let's do your 8. And so it wasn't a big fight now. All of a sudden we were figuring out where could we compromise and meet in the middle that would be satisfactory.
Yeah, I like that. You're moving out of that black and white of just kind of having these two options as well.
Exactly.
To find some layers in there. Is there ever a time when it's better not to state a boundary or a need during conflict?
Again, to me, it so depends on who the conflict's with.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm having a conflict with a safe person, and what I mean by that is somebody that's wanting to grow, willing to change, willing to look at their part, willing to see me and understand where I'm coming from, then I want to be able to state boundaries and talk about boundaries. But if I'm with a pure narcissist, basically what I want people to realize that when we talk about gray rocking a narcissist, what we mean is be a gray rock. That means be like every other rock in the world. Don't be noticeable. Don't be standing out. Because what happens when you try to reason with a narcissist, when you try to give more information to try to get them to understand you better, they're not hearing you accurately. They're hearing it in order to twist it and use it as ammunition against you.
Mm-hmm.
And so for you to try to explain your boundary and go into great detail about your needs, etc., you're giving them ammunition to use against you. And so if you're with a pure, straight narcissist that's not willing to look at their stuff at all, to me, I don't even want to discuss it. This is the boundary. It's done. No discussion. Because they're going to say, I just want to talk about it. I just want to discuss it. The only reason they want to discuss it is to try to influence your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
They're not wanting to discuss it so their thinking can be influenced. It's only so they can mess with your thinking. And so by you getting drawn into, oh, well, let's just have a discussion. They just want to discuss it. You're thinking we're going to influence each other. No, it's only so they can play with your brain.
I forget the name of it. There's a good assertiveness book from the 70s. It has this line that says, logic is what other people use to convince you that you're wrong. So we're going to move on to kind of our final subset of questions here, which I'll loosely say are dealing with moving on and finding closure. And so the first one here is, after a divorce, how can I heal from the feelings of failure and loneliness?
Yeah. So again, they've highlighted two key pieces, and I would add actually a third piece to it. There's a huge grieving element that comes in after a divorce that just takes a couple of years often for people to get through it. But number one is the failure piece. So again, a couple factors with this. To me, there's a true guilt and false guilt component to feeling a failure. So most of us can look back on failed relationships and realize, oh, I could have done something different there. I could have handled that better. So, okay, I screwed up there. That's on me. We own it, and we have regrets about it. What happens though in a narcissistic relationship is there's a ton of false guilt. They make you feel everything was your fault. If you only had given yourself more, been more considerate, been more giving, the relationship would have worked. So after the fact, that false guilt will still get triggered in your limbic brain, and you'll get emotional reasoning happening where I should have been able to do something. Oh, if only I'd done more. No, realize if they weren't willing to do anything, wouldn't matter what I tried to do, it wouldn't have made it work. It takes two to make a relationship work. It's not all on me. It's their part in it besides my part. So I got to be able to get out of the false guilt and the emotional reasoning to realize the bigger picture of relationships, that it's their contribution just as much as mine. And then beyond that, it's realizing that a lot of stuff that I was told where I was being selfish, I wasn't. A lot of stuff that I was being accused of wasn't even true, but I was believing it because I'd been gaslit for so long. And so there's a ton of, like thousands of different things that create false guilt that come out of narcissistic relationships that are going to get triggered and haunt you for several years after you leave it and make you kind of go back into feeling guilty. And it's don't feed it, get help to help you realize that's a lie, that wasn't my fault. What about them? They didn't, look at all the stuff they did, and they weren't willing to change. Usually we need help to process through that very complicated false grief stuff. So that's part one. But it's realizing that even with false guilt, for most people, it takes a couple years to retrain your conscience, to get it back to not having that false guilt triggered. And so time again to grieve, time again to work through the false guilt. And then the loneliness piece. So the reality of life is when you go to having a significant person take a significant amount of time in your life and then they're gone, there is a vacuum. There is going to be loneliness. But the limbic brain only sees the present moment and think that's forever. Mm-hmm. It's short-sighted. I got to be able to go, okay, I can sit in a bit of loneliness for now. It's not going to kill me. I can develop a relationship with myself. I can reach out to some friends. I can gradually work through this loneliness. This is temporary. So again, the emotional reasoning is I feel so lonely. It feels like this is going to be forever. This must be the truth. No, it's not. Yes, I feel lonely, but I can take steps to quickly start to remedy that and to change that.
How do we avoid self-sabotaging and running back to what's familiar when we're facing these unfamiliar, new, or lonely paths?
So, what I want people to realize is, so let's say you've gone in a relationship, even though it's abusive, that still somebody was in your life, somebody was there. Now you're totally alone. And you originally go, I left that relationship on my own will because it was so unhealthy and I want to get healthy. And you see immediate benefits. But then what begins to happen is the loneliness sets in, the fear of the future. Will I ever get anybody again? That gets so painful, so overwhelming that I don't want to sit in it. I don't want to me, I think it's going to go forever. Instead of saying, you know what, I might have to sit in this for 6 months, but I'm going to take steps to get out of it. It's so painful. It's so intense that I'd rather go back to the old and familiar because it's better than this. So it's very much the limbic brain thinking only in terms of short-term, instant gratification, removal of pain. And it's also what comes out of complex trauma is I have great difficulty tolerating any distress because my fear is any negative, painful emotion. If I sit in it for so long, something bad's going to happen. Something even worse is going to happen. I'm going to get even more pain coming out of this. So as soon as I get any painful emotion, I got to go to fight, flight, because I can't just sit in it. Something bad's going to happen. And it's beginning to realize, no, I can tolerate distressful emotions. I got good supports now. I got tools now. I'll get through this. I can get through this just fine. I don't need to go to fight or flight. And so it's developing the ability to distress tolerance is what we say. And that's so important for people to begin to realize that, yes, I'm going to go through loneliness. Yes, there's going to be a certain amount of pain there. But if I'm taking steps to build healthy connections with others, it's not going to last very long.
Mm. I think that's a good segue then to, what are healthy things that we can attach to, and how do we find and know that we've found healthy people to connect with?
Oh, the questions that are so common. And I laugh not because they're dumb questions or bad questions or people shouldn't be asking. No, they're the reality of recovery. They're real life. They're important questions. It's just almost everybody goes through it, and
Mm.
they're so common. So part to me is often when we are in pain, often when we feel lonely and we long for connection, we need connection. There's no denying that. But what I want people to see is that the thinking of people is still very much childlike complex trauma thinking, which is all the answers are in the external. I need everybody else to come and meet my needs. I need everybody else to connect with me. Really, I need to connect with myself. I need to learn to meet my own needs. That's where the healing begins. It's not that others are going to come and fix me. Others are going to come and take care of me. Yes, that's going to happen eventually where I'm going to develop connections, and that's really great. But I need to develop a connection with myself. I need to learn to have a relationship with myself. And to take that even farther, if I don't learn to have a relationship with myself and connect with myself, I'm going to go into other relations and not have very good connection because I don't know how to connect in healthy, deep ways. So I got to get connection with myself as number one before I even start connecting with others. Then to me, the second piece becomes, let's focus on just developing one good friend for now. But I can have a bunch of casual friends. So I can go to a support group like a 12-step group, a church group, pet adoption agency where I volunteer. I can volunteer in different types of activities where I'm starting to meet people and engage with people with similar passions and desires. And based on that, I can begin to form acquaintances, casual friendships. I can begin to kind of notice how healthy they are, red flags that they have. Do I want to open up a bit more to this person or set boundaries early with this person? And gradually, after 6 months or a year, I'm getting a couple people that I go, hey, I think we could become good friends. I've weeded out 100 people, but I'm getting down to a couple people. So you got to start with putting yourself out there with people that are kind of in a recovery mindset and that share similar values and passions as you do. That's your best chance to find some safe people, but you still got to weed out. That doesn't assume they're all going to be safe and healthy. And so you give yourself time to get to know people at a casual level and then go from there.
Hmm. So you touched on this. I'm going to jump to the last question because it's something that you touched as the first part of the last one. So how are there examples or tools that you could give for how I can begin to meet my need for connection and belonging on my own?
Yeah. Wonderful question. One of the things for me is, so let me give you a couple of things that I've done in my own life. And they don't work for everybody, but I'm going to throw them out there and people can try them. And if they work for them, great. For me, one of the very first things that I did in my teens was I started journaling. And the whole purpose of journaling was to slow myself down at the end of a day and go, so it wasn't, oh, I did this. It was, how am I doing? What am I feeling? What's going on inside of me? It was an introspective look into my emotional world and my thought life to get a sense of where I was at. And I journaled about that. And so it was highlighting anger, fear, hurt, positive things, insights. So that was all just starting to connect. And then I went through a time where, and I still do this, not formally, but where I would, in the morning, a scale of 1 to 10, what emotions am I feeling? So I'm feeling a bit of sadness. Okay, scale of 1 to 10, intensity, 1, hardly any, 10, it's overwhelming. I'm feeling some hurt. I'm feeling some stress. And I would go through kind of a bunch of different emotions, guilt, shame, grief, anxiety, and I would just do an inventory of my emotions. Then I do a body scan. What am I feeling in my body? Muscles, pain, and that was very helpful. So it's just that mindfulness that takes time to connect with myself, almost like a date with myself, to go, how am I doing? But gets very specific. How about this emotion? How about this emotion? How about this emotion? How about this in your body? What are you thinking about? And as I became aware of that, what I began to realize was I started to do that almost automatically, subconsciously throughout the day. It just became such a habit in my brain that it became part of my daily life. I didn't have to formally do it anymore. The third thing that I did that was very helpful for me is to have a couple key people in my life, so Kim and a couple friends, where I would talk to a couple times a week, and they would ask me questions. Because often I think I'm being really self-aware and mindful, but I'm missing stuff. And they're spotting stuff. And they're saying, what about this? How are you doing over here? Oh, yeah, okay, I hadn't even thought of that. So we still need those mirrors outside of ourselves that reflect back to us kind of how we're doing. One other thing, if I can.
No, go ahead.
Well, and this is a bigger picture thing, but to me, part of growing in self-awareness and being aware of myself is I have to constantly be learning, so reading and listening. As I hear different presentations about how we work, about trauma, about our brain, about our body, I go, okay, yeah, wow, okay, yeah. I need to be reminded of that. Oh, I hadn't quite seen it that way before. And it just causes the self-awareness to grow. So it's realizing this, you don't develop 100% accurate self-awareness overnight. It's a lifelong venture. You're always growing gradually in it. And so these are just some of the tools to help you gradually improve.
I think those are a lot of really valuable tools. And maybe just as an overlay, some of what I hear you saying are something that's valuable in a lot of these answers is learning patience with yourself.
Exactly.
And another is self-kindness. And a final really important one is that connection, finding healthy people to connect to.
Exactly. Well
Yeah.
summarized.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tim, so much for sharing your wisdom with us today, and thank you for everybody joining us on this journey through navigating difficult relationships, setting boundaries, and the painful places when we have to move on and find closure. It's not easy to face these challenges, but remember that every small step you take toward clarity and healing is a powerful act of self-care. And so until next time, keep being kind to yourself. Thank you for joining us on the Time with Tim podcast. If you'd like to share your own experiences or have questions, feel free to email us at podcasts@timfletcher.ca. Want to learn more about complex trauma? Subscribe to Tim Fletcher's YouTube channel for past lectures and his Friday night Tim Talks. You can also connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Looking for more support? We offer programs and courses to help with healing complex trauma and recovering from addictions. Visit timfletcher.ca to learn more or send us an inquiry. We're here to support you. Until we meet again, take care, and thank you for letting us be a part of your healing journey.